Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy Ask Us Anything live stream, episode number 38. I'm Stephen Barr and Rahul. Hello, Subramaniam. How are you doing?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself.
Well, we had a little bit of audio difficulties today, but I think luckily we got them sorted just in the moment of time.
Yeah. How's your weekend been?
Oh,
And we're in episode number 38.
yeah. Life's good here. It was cold this weekend, really cold. We had little bits of snow. My wife was on a well-deserved little vacation, so that was really fun. So I had the kids, and we made some soup and watched movies and had a nice fire. And so it was fun.
That's really awesome.
How about you?
Doing very well. We are doing this episode literally from diametrically opposite parts of the world. It's 9:34 p.m. at this part of the world, which is Dubai, and you are in Seattle, which is exactly 12 hours away.
That's an interesting point. It's exact opposite. Wow.
And the miracles of modern technology, where you can literally be in exactly opposite ends of the world and still do a live stream together.
It is great. It's really exciting. Although we had to figure out what that audio issue was. But it's always new gear to play with, new technologies to learn. It's been an interesting week in tech, hasn't it?
It absolutely has been. So many new things happening, and so many different announcements all over the place. We have an exciting episode ahead, so let's try and cover as much of that as possible.
All right. Well, we're going to we have 4 different articles, and then we're doing a deep dive into EBS Volume Snapshot Archiving, which are quite complicated. So we will spend a bit of time on that. It's it took a while to wrap my head around it. But we've done that. We want to share that with you. So should we jump into CloudWatch Rum? Is this some kind of a new drink by Amazon? Let's.
Yeah. While you're bringing that up, I'm just going to add one other quick thing for the audience over here.
Sure.
We are trying to make sure that the content that we're providing on this live stream is relevant to you. So if you're just tuning in or you're here for the first time, please feel free to use the chat, use the comments across whatever platform you're using. They'll come to us. We'll try and address those questions. And if you have any feedback for us, let us know so we can incorporate it into our live stream over here. And we want to make sure that we are presenting and discussing the stuff that you want to hear and see.
No, absolutely. We're all about building that community, being useful. Actually, speaking of community, I forgot to tell you, I got into the AWS Community Builder program.
Phenomenal. So, congratulations.
Thanks. So we'll be excited to kind of take this to the next level in terms of building up community around AWS, around cloud operations, because that's what we're all about, is cost optimization along the way so that your business can thrive, or your operation can stay running while you don't waste money where you don't have to. All right.
Absolutely. All good things.
Well, with that being said, let's jump into CloudWatch Run Real User Monitoring. Let me cue up the transition. Here we go. Okay, there it is. CloudWatch RUM now supports customer-defined metrics for troubleshooting and monitoring. So what is real user monitoring? Is this a new feature or our real user monitoring has been around, but it's this new feature of the ability for customers to define custom metrics that we sent to CloudWatch Metrics. Correct. So what would you use this for?
So this is, I think, fundamentally for the application itself. That might be a front-end facing application. Most of what we know CloudWatch Metrics being used for is for all of your infrastructure monitoring and the metrics associated with them. So for example, if you have EC2 instances, you've got CPU utilization, memory utilization, you've got network IO, disk IO, all of that stuff, right? But what if you really want to understand the metrics around what your application is actually doing as customers interact with it? I think there's a great example, if I read correctly, about dropped calls on your video application. Maybe you're using the Chime SDK, maybe you're using something else. whenever you have those kind of applications and you want to figure out what actually happened with your application, you can use these custom metrics, not just the CloudWatch logs part of it, but use custom metrics to understand when and what failed.
This is interesting, network bandwidth of a dropped call. So it would help you define your codecs. Maybe your target market is in a place where they don't have great bandwidth, so you'd want to maybe change your features or change some way of your content delivery so that it's a better experience. So that's a really interesting idea.
Right. And to understand how many, a particular application failure might have affected, and how quickly you recovered from it, or how quickly you responded to it, or whether certain latencies in the service have degraded. All of those metrics can now be available in the same platform that you use for not only for the backend, but you can use it for the front end as well.
Okay. So in terms of cost savings, is this just about the insights and the visibility that you can get? And because this won't save you money in and of itself, but it will help you figure out what to do to make the experience better for your users, so that in the end of the day, you can maybe tighten up your own infrastructure. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think I would put this in the bucket of efficiency rather than cost optimization, because instead of having different places where you go and record all of these different metrics, when you finally need to do postmortems, or you need to really understand how customers are getting impacted, instead of having to combine data from different sources, which is your CloudWatch metrics, plus stuff that might be in a bunch of other applications like Datadog or whatever else, you can have them all in one place and look at it in a unified manner, so to speak. So I think it speaks more to efficiency, and it looks like AWS is also starting to compete with some of the players in the application monitoring space.
That will be interesting. I think that's one of the, I wouldn't say hazards, but I guess understood risks of getting into business with AWS is that eventually they might compete with you. And I think that the good idea is, if you find yourself in that position, how do you say it? Don't get into a breath holding contest with Amazon. That's typically not a winning strategy. Differentiate.
I think you have to be differentiated. And I do think that a bunch of the APM solutions out there do have differentiated use cases. This literally takes the least common denominator set of use cases and brings them all into CloudWatch. If you really wanted to dive deep and you wanted to do something, if you really wanted very detailed knowledge of exactly what's happening, you would probably need to go with an APM platform. Though I don't know how long that differentiation will last and what AWS might want to build on this platform, but I think there's some time for that to happen.
Well, I think we see that another comparable would be QuickSight versus, say, Tableau, right? Where first you say, oh, you can't do anything. QuickSight's more limited, but then it keeps growing, and all of a sudden you think, well, why are we paying all this extra for Tableau when QuickSight it might be good enough?
That is right. So unless you are a Tableau, or by and large, customers are going to benefit from these new services, from these new integrations, and I think in the grand scheme of things, it's a good thing.
All right. Well, what's our final verdict on this one?
Oh, this one would definitely be simplifies, because if you want some of the basic application monitoring stuff, this should do it. So,
and then
call it a simplifies, and I'd give this one if you pull up the user guide, I actually found this to be pretty detailed on how you create these custom metrics, and they have the concept of extended metrics. So, great job on this simple user guide. Anyone can follow it, create these very, very quickly, and start using it. So I would give this a good 4 out of 5.
4. There we go. I clicked 4.5. All right, 4 cloud. That's pretty good.
Yeah. It's getting close. Like I find it hard to distinguish between a 4 or 4.5, and I probably will leave half for room for improvement always. So
I think getting a 5 would be It would have to be pretty phenomenal. All right, well, let's take a quick break, have a little word from Cloudfix, from our sponsor, and then we will come back and we're going to be talking about Resilience Hub.
Yeah.
Public cloud costs going up and your AWS bill growing without the right cost controls? Cloudfix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by focusing on AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe with zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. The best part? With your approval, Cloudfix finds and implements AWS fixes to help you run more efficiently. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right, here is AWS Resilience Hub, adds application change capabilities and simplified APIs. I'm dropping the link right now to the article in the chat so you can follow along on the new article. This was posted a couple of days ago, February 23rd. Resilience Hub added change capabilities, new APIs to streamline and simplify use of, they're targeting our rating system, streamline and simplify use of service and improve the precision of its recommendations. Resilience Hub provides a single place to define, validate, track the resilience of your applications so you can avoid unnecessary downtime.
So do you remember Chaos Monkey from Netflix?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is kind of the little brother or little sister of Chaos Monkey, where in a very controlled manner, you can introduce certain stacks and answer questions like what would happen if a certain region went down? What would happen if a certain AZ became unavailable? What would happen if my Route 53 service kind of becomes unavailable? So if you needed to do an audit to really understand how your application behaves or recovers from certain kinds of situations, then you can very deliberately simulate those scenarios and execute them to see what happens to your application. Now, this takes a kind of different approach to Chaos Monkey, where Chaos Monkey works on probabilities, where you literally let loose a hypothetical monkey into your environment, and it randomly, based on certain probabilities, and it'll pull out, certain services, it'll just shut down instances, it will cause all kinds of chaos, and you can then observe the situation to figure out how your application reacted. This version that AWS, or the approach that AWS has taken with Resilience Hub, takes a very much more controlled approach to things, where you say, here's my stack. I'm going to kind of, launch this new CloudFormation stack that's going to delete a bunch of very specific resources instead of just randomly shutting stuff out in scenarios that you might not have anticipated. This basically computes resilience or helps you observe resilience in a much more controlled environment where you decide what is allowed to go down.
Well, it's really neat to be able to test, because you don't want the first time you do a recovery to be under some kind of duress when you really need it to be. Actually, it reminds me, a long time ago when I was a teenager, I did a little bit of consulting for a local manufacturing company, and they had these backups on floppy disks, and the person who was making the backups, she was very, very, very procedural, and she was so proud of the collection of nicely labeled ones. But I watched her through this process, and she was clicking this one button like instinctually and ignoring the fact that it was an error message that she was just instinctively clicking past, and all of her beautifully archived disks were blank. And so I guess the moral of the story is luckily we had time to test the procedure, change the procedure, revise the procedure when it wasn't an emergency and the computer had gone down and we need the customer database. And so having this Resilience Hub, being able to test it in advance, what happens if this fails? What happens if this fails?
Right. I think in my mind, like I was thinking about this earlier today, about when would I use something like Chaos Monkey and when would I use something like Resilience Hub? And I think the more I think about it, I would start the process of testing resilience for my application by just launching Chaos Monkey and let it break things. And once I figure out exactly what resources in unavailability causes my application to crash, that's when I would create a very specific script, deploy it in Resilience Hub, and see what happens when that one resource goes down. Because I think the harder part is trying to figure out in a very highly dependent ecosystem of different services. It's really hard to figure out under what scenario your application is going to go down. And you really need randomness and that chaos to nail down these edge cases that you would have never thought about. But once you've figured out what that edge case is, then a more rigorous and systematic test makes a lot more sense. So I still think something like Chaos Monkey is very relevant. It would just have been better for this particular article to, state more clearly what, when you would use it, how you would use it, what would a strategy be.
Yeah.
I looked through a lot of the documentation. It's not crisp enough for me.
Well, it's funny. It reminded me of this tweet. I'm looking at it now, about two and a half years ago, by Colin Percival, who he's really neat. And he said, "I want an AWS region where everything breaks with high frequency." That's a neat way of doing it. Just have a region called the flaky region.
Yeah.
And just deploy your code to the flaky region and see what happens.
That would have been the most amazing feature from AWS.
This is cool. US fail 1.
That is a really good one.
Or US chaos 1. So I'll put this thread in the chat. This is actually a pretty good thread. But it shows that this is an important... I mean, it's humorous, but it points to something that's pretty important. How do you test?
Yeah.
And the more reliable the services get, in a sense, you don't get as many opportunities to test in the wild when they actually break. So
Correct.
You need to test in advance to know what happens, know what your dependencies are. Is there some sneaky dependency in US East 1 that's still there? Even if you don't think there is, that can happen a lot. Well, How do we rate this?
I think I'm going to give this a 3-star because this could have been better explained. When you use it, how you use it. It seems to be a very feature-specific announcement.
Yeah, the way they're saying import sources to effectively manage your Resilience Hub applications. They should have gone back through give us an example of a Resilience Hub application.
Yep. And if you go back to the documentation, which is the link, literally the last word, it goes into, again, a big, product documentation kind of setup. It's not the simple use cases that'll help someone get started.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's always hard. You want to balance making it new friendly, but also having it feature full so that the power users can use it.
Exactly.
Well, do we see this as a simplifies? I mean,
I don't know if it simplifies. I think I'd be neutral on this at this point. But this one, I think from a tip for someone who's trying to use AWS, just to know that there are these tools available, because you do need to validate the resiliency of your application. Even though everything seems secure, everything feels like it can, run well for a long time. I think having this chaos test is really important, because the whole idea of leveraging the cloud is to make sure that systems are independent of each other. They have a recovery mechanism of their own, and you have an elastic system that can adapt to whatever scenarios are thrown at it. So I think it's just, it's neutral. 3.5 was, what did I give? 3.5?
You have 3. Rating?
3, yeah. And yes, go check out Chaos Monkey and check out Resilience Hub as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's have another quick break. And then when we come back, we are going to talk about consolidated control findings. Let's jump into that. We'll be right back.
Public cloud costs going up and your AWS bill growing without the right cost controls? CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by focusing on AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe with zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. The best part? With your approval, CloudFix finds and implements AWS fixes to help you run more efficiently. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right, here is consolidated control findings. Let's see, announcing consolidated control findings and a consolidated controls view.
Yeah, let's present this
AWS
on the
Security
screen.
Hub. I see. Yep. There we go.
Is it
Thanks.
that one? There we go. Okay. So this is really interesting. Now, for a lot of organizations, when they have to do certifications and they have to do all these audits, they basically run a lot of these findings or reports or whatever, which you can do in the where you can basically look at, you set up different standards, and then you use Security Hub to go find, kind of very similar to our CloudFix finders. You can go find scenarios where these hold true or don't hold true, and those basically help you create these massive lists of checks. For a lot of organizations, the big problem is that they need to do multiple different certifications, and more often than not, the checks that span these different certifications are very similar. So what Consolidated Controls allows you to do is, when you go into that particular view, you only get one instance of that particular check, which allows you to triage and get to the bottom of it very quickly. So instead of doing duplicate checks and potentially duplicate independent triages across different certifications, where typically there's one team doing SOC 2, there might be another team doing an ISO certification, there might be another team that might be doing HIPAA compliance. You don't want all three to kind of try and tackle the same check and try and solve the same problem in three different ways. The consolidated control findings will basically merge those checks across these different standards and will allow you to triage them and fix them once, and therefore fix it for all certifications. So this may be a niche for a bunch of organizations, but I think this becomes very critical for large enterprises because they are the laggards in the adoption to the cloud. So this goes a long way in resolving all these certifications that they really need to get through to be able to say their applications are going to be safe as they move to the cloud.
And it's interesting. I used to work in healthcare IT, and I remember, there's this big fear over HIPAA, and people would say HIPAA. But then you read the HIPAA spec; it's not that hard.
Yeah.
But the scary thing is the downsides if you get it wrong. So that's where I can understand their nervousness, their hesitance, and then you can see, okay, here's my server right here. Here's my server rack. I have a feeling of control, and so being able to anything that can help with this compliance.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm all for that.
Yeah, so I think this simplifies the life of any sets of teams that are trying to get compliance going for their organizations. It helps simplify the onboarding process. It could potentially take much less time to do it. I'd give this a 3.5 in terms of rating for this. This blog post itself could have had a little more illustration about exactly how someone would go about doing it or how they see it, what the process for, if there are any best guidelines for deciding how to triage it effectively. Those would have been good. But most of it, like if you just read through the documentation, feels like common sense. So 3.5 is, I think, fair for this.
And it seems like it's written for people who are very deep into this particular world. This isn't some what do you call it? This isn't a general feature. This is very, very specific to some people who care greatly about this.
Correct. And I don't know of that many teams, especially in the SMB world, that end up using Security Hub, very regularly. But this takes it to a whole other level where you have all these certifications and it's just making life easy. So completely agree.
Hey, we got a comment. Pop this up. Interesting how AWS has so much going on every week.
Just for stats, there are over 50 completely new announcements being created at AWS every single week, and we sift through them to literally bring up maybe three or four of them. I mean, if we could literally spend an entire week discussing them and talking about them, a lot of them end up, we literally just sift through all of that and bring you only what we think are the most important ones that you would care about.
I was just in a meeting with AWS just before this live stream started, and in the meeting we said, thank you, you guys are incredible. You're building all of these things so fast, but it's hard for these engineering teams to even keep up. You need someone full time just to read it, and then you have to read it, and you have to say what applies to us, and how do you prioritize it? How do you evaluate it? Does it make sense for your team? There's a lot out there, and so that's why Rahul and I do what we're doing to distill it, bring you what we think is the best of it and the most applicable in a given week. So yeah, thanks for that, Ranjan. Neat. All right, well, let's do article number 4, which is about ECS. ECS supports deletion of inactive task definition revisions. I'll pull up our transition and then we'll dive right in.
Okay.
All right, ECS now supports deletion of inactive task definition revisions.
Yep.
What is an
inactive? I pulled this one up because I have some personal stories from the time that ECS was first launched. So we started becoming very, very big users of ECS literally the week it was announced in preview. And one of the first problems that folks had with, or that we had with ECS was we would launch so many tasks that the UI would just not work. The UI couldn't load the number of tasks that we had. And so you couldn't delete anything from the UI. You couldn't, you literally couldn't set up anything from the UI because the console would not launch. Other than that ECS one, I have never known the AWS console to fail on any service. And that is what is happening on it. And the ECS team was, they couldn't believe that was happening till we got on a call. We showed it to them and they were like, okay, now what do? We can't even get on the console.
So some console was trying to render many megabytes of JSON or something like that.
Massive amounts of JSON, which actually had the entire life cycle with history of what happens with every task. I don't think they expected more than 3 or 4 tasks in the console, and we had hundreds.
And this is before GraphQL, right? So these APIs are going to return you everything instead of just what you ask.
Exactly. So just coming back to this particular announcement, here we go. So what this is basically doing is invariably what happens is that there are a lot of tasks that you just leave on the ECS console, which are set to 0, in terms of scale, which basically means that they've been inactive for a very long time. And there really wasn't any mechanism, unless you went via the API, to take and delete a task definition. For most people who had a little bit of scale, it wouldn't even bother them. But if you've seen the ECS console, searching through your tasks, figuring out, what is where, once you have hundreds of these tasks lying around, just filtering through them and just doing basic sanity checks becomes a pain, because you can't just use API for everything unless you built another UI of your own to just manually look through some stuff. So now you can actually go ahead and delete those inactive tasks, keep things clean. And that level, that simple hygiene also goes a long way in making sure that you don't have stuff that's just sitting idle for for a long time. When you go see an inactive task, you might also find some stuff which may be running with minimum load, but it just triggers an action where you say, I really don't need it. I don't know why this thing is still running. And you might delete a bunch of other stuff very deliberately, which you wouldn't have otherwise even bothered to look at. So sometimes the console helps draw attention to certain cost-saving measures. So I'd say that's why I kind of like the idea that you can also delete these. Like, it shouldn't feel like 47 pages of next on your console.
Because it's easy to get bored of that, and then you leave thinking, oh, it's only a few cents here or there, but then it adds up.
It adds up very, very quickly. Yeah. So I'd say this definitely simplifies.
All right.
Not having a delete feature just felt wrong. So I think it was really necessary. And
well, let's look at the accompanying blog post. Right, like they've got a blog post. They've got command lines. They're showing you how to use it with the CLI.
Yeah,
this looks fairly straightforward. Oh, they even got a bash script to loop over. That's useful.
Yeah, that is very, very useful. I think this one is really neat. I'd give this a 4.5.
There you go. All right. If you want to get high ratings, have a bash script.
These are literally the things that engineers want, right? I mean, they want this super simple bash script that they can run, and that basically goes ahead. I think the ones that started this first, I remember when we first started with Docker over a decade ago, just being able to delete the containers that had died or that had exited, or what are the thing? Exits, which had the exit status.
All of a sudden you realize you have no more hard disk space. And you're like, oh shoot.
To go. Not only that, it's a pain to go through, because you need the container ID every time you want to look at logs or look at whatever else. And then you have to sift through the massive list of exited containers that, would just mess up your entire workflow. So it's just super easy to write a simple bash script. And I think Docker was one of the first ones that published, hey, just, delete all, it just looped through all the containers that were there, looked for status. It was a simple sedoc script that would look for, the status being exited and would kill it. That's it.
I had, this sounds super nerdy. I had an Emacs macro to do that for me before we had this Docker script. So I'd run a bash command and dump it into a buffer, and it would do that for me.
Yeah, I remember. I still am very, very fond of my .emacs script. It goes with me wherever I go.
Awesome. Hey, look, we got a comment from Darko. Hey, Darko, glad that you are with us, and thanks for the congrats on the community builder. We're very excited about that, and looking forward to seeing you in Seattle again soon.
Yep, and for those of you who don't know, Darko is at AWS and is doing an amazing job at building the AWS community himself. And he's a big fan of old computers and a collector of sorts. So please follow him. Please look up his AWS. What is it called? Build on AWS?
Build on AWS. And I'm actually, let me put this on screen right now. He just did something really, really neat of getting Kubernetes to work on a TRS-80, I believe.
Yeah.
This is pretty cool. So there's Darko. This is pretty cool. And read his write-up. Build on.aws. You go, it's a Tandy 102. So this was super cool. Have a listen. I've seen Darko's vintage computer collection. It's something to behold. It's cool.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Darko. And
this link in the chat as well.
Thanks for all the amazing work that you've been doing.
Absolutely. All right. Well,
awesome.
Let's do one more quick break, and then when we come back, we are going to do a deep dive into EBS Volume Snapshot Archiving. There is a lot to do there, so get ready.
Is your AWS public cloud bill growing? While most solutions focus on visibility, CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by finding and implementing AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe. There's zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. We've helped organizations save millions of dollars across tens of thousands of AWS instances. Interested in seeing how much money you can save? Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your yearly savings.
All right, let's do our deep dive. All right, I'm going to shuffle the board around a little bit. Let's do this in Spotlight view, I believe. Spotlight view. Sorry about this. Spotlight light. There we go. And then through the green screen technology, let's give this a shot. All right, there we go.
There we go.
Amazon Elastic Block Store, deep dive into snapshots. And there is an accompanying blog post, which we'll be talking about on the CloudFix blog. I'll post that in a link. I'll put it in the comments now so we can follow along. That is right there. Okay, let's check this out. All right, so EBS stands for Elastic Block Storage. And so what is EBS? Well, it attaches directly to a queue or a Lambda. It's a file system. It is high performance. It's usually SSD backed, any of the ones that you want to use. And it's OS native storage. Okay, so here's the pricing. Standard EBS is about 5 cents per gigabyte per month. Now, always caveat, this is US East 1 as of February 2023. So it's expensive. It's double the price of S3, but the advantage is that you get native OS file store. So instead of using S3 and having to go via the Boto 3 or the CLI, you have just a native file system. You can mount it on multiple Lambdas at the same time, but you're using just regular file system calls to interact with it. Okay. Let's see this. Next slide here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so what are EBS snapshots? Well, EBS snapshot captures the state of the file system at any point in time. And snapshots are incremental. And so what it means is if you start with a certain amount of data, take a snapshot, the next snapshot you take, it will only snapshot the new data. So in a way, if you're a developer, it's a lot like Git in that sense. And then snapshot pricing is based on the size of the increment. And that's really important because snapshot archive pricing is not. It is the full thing. All right. So let's have a look at a hypothetical snapshot. So say we have snapshot A, and it's 10 gigabytes, and we're just dividing it into a 6 gigabyte section and a 4 gigabyte section. Now the first snapshot, snapshot A, it has all of the data. Now if you did snapshot B, say 4 gigabytes of that data changed. So this is just kind of setting it up for a pricing discussion. So say 4 gigabytes of that data changes. So that way, if you snapshotted snapshot B right now, it's only charging at 4 gigabytes because that's the size of the increment. And then that 6 gigabytes points back at snapshot A. And so in EBS parlance, this is called, is the data referenced or not? So in snapshot B, 6 of that is referenced back to A, and then 4 gigabytes is what we call unreferenced, meaning nothing else is pointing at it. So it lives only in snapshot B. Okay. So moving this along, snapshot B is going to cost that incremental price difference, 4 gigabytes, 5 cents per month. And now say you have snapshot C, where you added on another 4 gigabytes. The other two are references. So say that it evolves this way. Well, how much is this going to cost? Ooh, I forgot to change that one from black. Apologies. This is going to cost just your additional 4 gigabytes. So 5 cents times 4. And then finally, snapshot D, that say you change this 4 gigabytes and then add another 2, so that this pink 4 here, this now becomes unreferenced because nothing else is pointing at it. So that's what this diagram is showing you. So 6 gigabyte remains unchanged, references A. 4 gigabyte is unchanged and references B. 4 is changed, and so it's unreferenced because snapshot D doesn't need it, snapshot B doesn't need it. If the adjacent snapshots don't need it, it is therefore unreferenced. And then 2 gigabytes are added. Okay, so let's use this setup to go through some observations here. Well, number one, snapshots are incremental. And the pricing is based on incremental data needed. And data is unreferenced when it is unique. So in here, this pink data here is unique to a snapshot. Okay, so now let's talk about snapshot archive. So archiving a snapshot costs 25% relative to standard storage. And then you are also charged, there has to be a balance. It can't just be cheaper and nothing else. So it costs money, 3 cents per gigabyte to restore, takes up to 72 hours to restore it. You have to store a snapshot archive for at least 90 days. And archive snapshots are full, not incremental. So remember, in the other ones, we added 4 gigabytes. Well, the other ones are charged at that 4 gigabyte rate. You're charged for 4 gigabytes, whereas if you archive a snapshot, you are paying for the entire thing. So what it comes down to in terms of calculations is you want to make sure that, well, if you look at the price ratios, snapshot archiving is a quarter of the cost. So you want to make sure that the amount of unreferenced data in your snapshot is at least a quarter because you're doing the whole thing. So that's a bit convoluted. We'll get into that.
So quick question here, Stephen.
Yeah. Yes.
Can we go back to that slide that actually showed all the 4 snapshots?
Yes.
So if I were to archive snapshot D, am I archiving all of A, B, C, and D, or just the 6 gigs that are referenced from A, the 4 gigs referenced from B, and then the 4 gigs and the 2 gigs that are specific to D?
Okay, this is where it gets a bit involved. Okay, so you're saying if you archive D right now?
Yes.
Okay, we'll get. I have a slide on that. But if you archive D, what would happen is that if it's the last snapshot in the series, and you'll be charged at the whole thing. So I guess what is this? 16 gigabytes. So you'd be charged at 16 gigabytes times $0.0125.
Got it.
And so I'll go through a slide of do you want to archive for each of these. So actually, that's a great segue. So the big question then, based on all these numbers, let's see if I can do the question. There we go. Post back to here. Okay, so what is the question? To archive or not to archive?
Very Shakespearean.
This is and this was generated by the Midsummer generative art AI, Midjourney. I really like Midjourney. It's a lot of fun. So to archive or not to archive? This is the question that plagues us. Okay, so let's look at an example pricing. So snapshot A. So Amazon says that if you're archiving snapshots to reduce storage costs in the standard tier, don't do the first one. And the reason is, say if you archive the first one, well, your subsequent ones are not going to be archived right away, and they're probably going to have things that are referenced. So if you archive the first one, you kind of destroy its possibility. It's not going to archive things that are needed by later unarchived snapshots. So the advice for this is do not archive the first snapshot because you end up just double paying anyway. So for snapshot A, since it's the first in what's called a lineage, don't snapshot it. So that's the cost. If you did, you would pay 50 cents. Okay, 10 times 5 cents to be 50 cents, and then 10 times 12, or I guess, 1.0125 to 12.5 cents. But remember, you're paying both of them. So don't do that. Snapshot B. If you archive snapshot B, well, then what's going to happen is Snapshot C needs that data, and it's not in the archive yet. Do you see that Snapshot C, it's this data here, if we remember from the previous slide, I should have put the arrows on this one too. Snapshot C is still referencing this data. So if you archive B, it's not going to really help you at all because it's pointing at, we have a reference to it from something that isn't in the archive. So don't archive Snapshot B. Here's the cost calculation if you do, and we'll see that still archiving actually makes you worse off. So this is not like S3 intelligent tiering where you just turn it on and you start saving, or worst case, you stay the same. This is, you can be worse off if you're not careful with this. Snapshot C. Okay, Snapshot C here has 4 gigabytes of what's called unreferenced data. This is this pink one. And this is data that's totally unique to Snapshot C. And we see that 4 gigabytes is, well, let's see, the whole thing is going to be 10, so 14. So 4 gigabytes is 28.6% of the total. So that's greater than 25%. That's our threshold. So remember, we're archiving the whole thing. So we do want to archive Snapshot C because the savings outweigh that the fact that we're saving the whole thing. So in this case, we would want to archive Snapshot C. All right, and then finally, so Rahul, to get to your point, Snapshot D. Okay, and here's the cost calculations. So 20 cents versus 17.5 cents if you archive that. Because remember, you're archiving 14 gigabytes at the reduced rate versus 4 gigabytes at the incremental rate. Snapshot D. So AWS recommends not to archive the last snapshot in a lineage because you might need it later if you create future volumes. But if you know that that's the end of the line and you're only archiving this for, say, compliance purposes or this under normal operations, this is the end of the line and this is the final, then you archive. Otherwise, don't archive it. All right, so that's the convoluted way. And you look at the calculation, this would be, so we have 6 gigabytes of new data incremental, whereas archiving it would be the whole thing, 16 times 0.0125. So if this is the final snapshot, then yes, archiving will save you money. Wait, common pitfalls. Would that make, first of all, that makes sense? Ro, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. But for the audience, like, just full disclosure, it took Stephen and me days of literally reading every word of all the documentation that is there multiple times to truly understand it, and then created different interpretations of it, checked with the teams. Finally, we kind of figured out a way to simplify it. But to us, it seems like the simplified view. Give us your feedback. Let us know whether you really understood it. We also have the blog post. The link is right there in the comment section.
I'll put it on the screen.
Yeah,
this is what the blog post looks like.
The blog post where we try to explain things as simply as we possibly could. But this one, like, you would think that archiving actually saves you money, but there are only specific scenarios under which it actually makes a lot of sense. So, and doing tons of snapshots could actually be causing you tons of money. So there comes a certain time when you might also want to just take a full snapshot and delete all those incremental snapshots. Because if you know that you're not going back to a previous version of a snapshot, just delete all the incremental snapshots after you've taken a full snapshot and start from there.
Ooh, let's see. I think I have it in my common pitfalls list. Let's see. Oh no, I went to the beginning. Sorry about that. I'm trying this new way.
The slides.
Yes, I'm trying this new way of using this green screen, but it's a bit tricky because I couldn't get HDMI out to work on the other laptop, and so I've got it on this multi-monitor setup. I think this is okay. Let's see. That's all right. I think we covered most of it. I see. There we go. Okay, common pitfalls of snapshot archiving. You can make yourself.
You back on screen.
Thank you.
There you go.
You can make yourself worse off. And if you're snapshotting, like Rahul said, you're snapshotting too often, you have to use what's called the EBS direct APIs in order to figure out. So what it really comes down to is figuring out in the lineage how much unreferenced data you have. And that comes down to this. I still can't believe that they published this. Let's see. Can we switch back to the screen?
Here.
News there. The news view. Yep, that'll work. So they give you this 8-step procedure for how to determine when to archive a particular snapshot, which basically means you list all the blocks in. So say you're interested in should you archive a particular snapshot. Well, you list all the blocks in the snapshot before it, list all the blocks in the snapshot after it, and then you can use these API commands to compare between the previous and the current and the next. And if the same block changed between previous and current and next, then you know that it's unique to the current. And then you have to do the math, which suggests, okay, is the previous versus the current, is that 25% or more of your total volume size?
As you can see, this is completely mind-numbing, complicated stuff. So if you could give this snapshotting feature a rating, we would definitely mark it as a insanely complex process right now. And by the way, that command that actually computes the diffs, that one, I don't know whether we rated our blog post or whether we rated the feature when we brought that up.
I think the feature.
The feature is insanely complicated. We try to simplify this as much as possible. But that particular command that actually computes the diff can take an hour or more to compute the diffs every single time you run it.
And not just that, but they charge you for it.
They charge you also for it, for every time you actually compute it. So you have to be very careful about when you apply it, what how you actually compute it. It could potentially save you tons of money, but it has an equal chance, if you don't know what you're doing, to give you a massively bloated bill where you're spending multiples of a single volume's cost.
Absolutely. And that's why, talking from CloudFix perspective, we really see it that as a huge money saving, we call it a huge cost saving opportunity, because we've done this. This is already implemented. You don't have to implement this whole big. To do this, you're going to have to automate it, and then you're going to have to write some code. You're going to have to test it, make sure it's right. Then you're going to have to kind of implement all this logic into some decision management thing that exists. And it's in a sense, it's not a very interesting problem to work on, because you're going to do it once, but we've already done it. So that's where using CloudFix.
And more importantly, if you were just doing this manually, you are bound to make mistakes. This is complex. You do not want to do it in a non-automated manner. You want a tried and tested and hardened automation that runs it consistently, that runs it safely over and over again, because you're going to be using snapshots all the time. And that's kind of why we created CloudFix. We put it all in CloudFix. It runs all your stuff consistently and safely. So if you want to do it manually, well, we've tried to simplify these instructions as much as possible. You absolutely can. Go to the console, go to the API. You can do this yourself. You can write it up. It's not, a secret sauce.
Yep.
So yeah, you can do this all yourself, or you could just use automation that we've built and hardened for all the edge cases and made it available in CloudFix.
And to be clear, this is not, like I said, we didn't come up with this algorithm. This is the AWS recommended way of doing it.
Correct.
Like when we look on here we go. I'll put this up one more time. Guidelines and best practices for archiving snapshots. And it goes through this thing and it says, okay, here's what you have to do. Here's the, will you save money or not? Okay, just go through all these steps. And so that's what we've tried to distill down and then automate, so you don't have to. All right, let's turn off the green screen. Actually, that's pretty cool. I think I'll leave it there. All right. Well, thank
Awesome.
you so much, everyone, for watching. I think it's been a really fun episode. Hope we have given you some good tips and advice and useful information to help you optimize your operation. And yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for the comments. We got some great comments this episode. So thank you for your attention and for watching. I appreciate this one from Twitch. Clap. So thank you. We were proud of that one. So thank you, Intellect Devourer. That's how we felt. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And please do leave us feedback on any of the platforms. We would love to hear from you. We want to make sure that we are, like I said earlier, we are curating this content that's going to be useful for you, or in a manner that's useful to you. So please leave us your feedback, your comments, and we'd love to hear from you. And see you all next week.
All right. Have a good one. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Our end roll.
Is your AWS public cloud bill growing? While most solutions focus on visibility, CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by finding and implementing AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe. There's zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. We've helped organizations save millions of dollars across tens of thousands of AWS instances. Interested in seeing how much money you can save? Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your yearly savings.